Hello, friends, and welcome back to another episode of the Iron Sharpens Iron Bible Study Podcast. I wasn't really sure where I wanted to go with our Bible study this week, just having finished up our series on hope for facing storms. I keep talking about wanting to teach the book of James, but I've not really prepared a whole series to go through the book of James. But I do want to go to the book of James today, James chapter 3. And talk about taming the tongue. In James chapter 3, verses 1 and 2, it says, "Let not many of you become teachers, my brethren, knowing that as such we will incur a stricter judgment. For we all stumble in many ways. If anyone does not stumble in what he says, he is a perfect man, able to bridle the whole body as well." You know, as we come to this section of James's book, James introduces his teaching on the tongue in a jarring way. James opens in verse 1 of chapter 3 with the proclamation that many should not be teachers because those who teach will receive a stricter judgment. Part of the reason is given in verse 2. It says, "We all stumble in many ways, and being a teacher is just another way to stumble and to be judged with greater strictness." In short, the point James is making is that it's hard to say everything right. Being a teacher means that there are far more opportunities to say something wrong. It's a pretty simple equation that James offers. The more we talk, the more opportunities to stumble. As a reminder, James already instructed his readers to be quick to hear, slow to speak, and slow to anger, because human anger does not produce God's righteousness, back in James chapter 1. Now, James will go on to say something that can be hard to believe the first time that we read it. Let's look again at what James says in verse 2. It says, "And if anyone does not stumble in what he says, he is a perfect man, able also to bridle his whole body." Friends, this is it's an extraordinary statement. What James just said is that if you can control your tongue, then you can control your body. And James further points out that the mature, complete, or perfect person controls the tongue. Excuse me. Spiritual maturity is in controlling the tongue. The Proverbs teach the same point. Over in Proverbs chapter 21 and verse 23, it says, "Whoever keeps his mouth and his tongue keeps himself out of trouble." What did the writer of Proverbs just say? He said, if you control your tongue, then you control your body. He said, if you control your tongue, you can keep yourself out of trouble and calamity. James says that if we don't stumble in what we say, then we have hit maturity and are able to control the whole body. Now, I think James realizes that many people are going to argue with this point. How could controlling the tongue control the whole body? How could controlling the tongue mean that we are mature and perfect? How can he say this about the tongue? How could this proposition be true? James is going to prove this point with two illustrations in verses 3 and 4. Let's read verses 3 through 5 here, though. It says, "Now if we put the bits into horses' mouths so that they will obey us, we direct their entire body as well. Look at the ships also. Though they are so great and are driven by strong winds, are still directed by a very small rudder, wherever the inclination of the pilot desires. So also the tongue is a small part of the body, and yet it boasts of great things. See how great a forest is set aflame by such a small fire." The first illustration that we see is in verse 3. James says that if we put bits in the mouths of horses, we're able to make them obey us and able to direct their whole bodies. It's a simple illustration, but it's very effective. You can control the whole body of a horse by something that is in the horse's mouth. You can make the whole body of the horse obey you when you have put the bit in the horse's mouth. Then James moves on to his second illustration to prove the point that if you control the tongue, you will control the body. Look at verse 4. James asks his readers to consider ships. Even though they are very large, and even though strong winds can push the ship is still guided by a very small rudder. Please think about how James words this illustration in verse 4. The will of the pilot directs the ship, by a very small rudder, even though the ship is very large and is driven by strong winds. Both illustrations also seem hard to believe. You can control a powerful horse with a small bit in the mouth. You can control a large ship in the strong storm with a very small rudder. James draws the same conclusion at the beginning of verse 5. The tongue has great power. The tongue has the power for destruction, which he will talk about in the next few verses. We'll look at the point, Lord willing, maybe next week, but the tongue also has the power for direction, which is what these first two illustrations represent. The tongue has the power to control the body. The tongue has the power to control the direction for your life. To state this another way, we can steer the direction of our lives with our tongues. Listen to some of the Proverbs that make this point. Proverbs 18 and verse 21 says, "Death and life are in the power of the tongue, and those who love it will eat its fruit." And Proverbs 15 and verse 1, "A soft answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger." And finally, Proverbs 10 and verse 31, "The mouth of the righteous brings forth wisdom, but the perverse tongue will be cut off." There are so many biblical proverbs that teach that what you say is going to direct your life and affect your life. The tongue is to the person what the bit is to the horse, and the rudder is to the large ship. The tongue has the power to steer your life. Now, I want us to think about how true the statement is by thinking about your own life and thinking about the lives of others. Have you seen people's lives ruined because of what they've said? Have you seen people go through hard times because of the words that they have said? Have you seen people have more problems in life because they spoke foolish words or evil words rather than right and good words? Have you seen people get in trouble in life because they didn't hold their tongue? I think it's not hard to see the power of the tongue when we think about it. The tongue is very powerful when it comes to setting the direction of our lives. But now I want to bring us back to verse 2. The illustrations of verses 3 and 4 were used to prove what he said back in verse 2. If you can control your tongue, then you can bridle the whole body as well. The point is that there is great strength and self-control needed to tame the tongue. This point is made even more so in verse 8, where James proclaims that no one can tame the tongue because it's a restless evil. Obviously, James cannot mean this is an absolute sense. Otherwise, we would not be condemned for not taming our tongue. We would just defend ourselves by saying that no one can tame the tongue. The point is for us to understand the high degree of difficulty and the extraordinary control that we must possess to tame the tongue. We're commanded to tame the tongue, but it's not easy as it might sound. We even see this in verse 5. As small as the tongue is, it sure does boast a lot and say big things. When we think about the need for self-control in our lives, we need to think about the first application to our tongues. We can control our tongues. We must choose to control our tongues. We should want to control our tongues because it will set the direction and course for our lives. Here's the ultimate problem. If we're not controlling our tongues, then our tongues are controlling us. This is exemplified very well in the life of Jesus. 1 Peter 2, verses 21 through 23 says, "For to this you have been called, because Christ also suffered for you, leaving you an example, so that you might follow in his steps. He committed no sin, neither was deceit found in his mouth. When he was reviled, he did not revile in return. When he suffered, he did not threaten, but continued entrusting himself to him who judges justly." Consider that part of the example Jesus left for us was his self-control with his mouth. When the people were maligning and reviling Jesus, Jesus did not say maligning or malicious words back. Jesus did not use his tongue to threaten people even when he was suffering. Jesus did not use his tongue to lie or to be deceitful. Listen to how David put this goal for himself also in Psalm 39 and verse 1. It says, I said, I will guard my ways, that I may not sin with my tongue. I will guard my mouth with a muzzle, so long as the wicked are in my presence. David says that he's going to be watchful in what he is doing so that he will not sin with his tongue. Notice that David is going to take an active role in protecting his tongue by keeping himself from situations that would provoke his tongue. Not only this, David says he will guard his mouth with a muzzle when in the presence of the wicked. David knew that he needed to be even more careful with his words when he was around other people. If we will allow God to be in control of our tongues, then we can allow God to be in control of our lives. If we can exercise self-control with the tongue, then we can exercise self-control with our bodies. If we will set our tongues to be God-honoring and controlled, then we will have set our bodies on the course to be God-honoring and controlled. And I want to conclude with an implied point that James is making to us. We have control over our tongues. We can watch we're able to tame the tongue. The will of the pilot directs the ship with the rudder. Your will directs your life with your tongue. You have power over your tongue. Spiritual maturity is seen in your words. Now, I want you to think about this. What you say to people, it reveals your spiritual maturity. How you talk to people, how you handle difficulties, and how your tongue handles the normal currents of life shows your depth of maturity. Jesus guarded his tongue and was careful with all the words that he spoke. If we do not work to tame our tongues, then what hope is there for taming the rest of our bodies? James makes this point at the end of this chapter. Control the tongue, and you will control the direction of your life. That's all that I've got for this week. Like I was saying at the beginning of the episode, I wasn't really sure where to go with this week's study. I don't really have anything put together, so this may be just a one-off, or we may continue with this subject next week. But I hope that this episode was inspiring, and that it makes us take a look at ourselves and how we speak to others. So that's all that I have for this week's episode. Until our next sharpening session, stay steadfast, stay inspired, and may your faith continue to grow sharper each day.